We are here with Valerie now from Plant with Purpose, not Plant with a Purpose, which is what I've been saying wrong for a while now. All right, Valerie, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure, I'd love to. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Valerie Folks. I'm the local staff person for Plant with Purpose in Texas. We're headquartered in San Diego, so I'm the lonely staff person in the big state of Texas, but I live right here in Houston, and I have the privilege of being the liaison between our partners like Chapelwood and other churches and families with our amazing partnering farmers and communities around the world.
That's awesome. Well, we're super excited to have you on, and we're super excited to have Plant with a Purpose on and talk about all the fun stuff that's happening and all the cool stuff. I think you were one of the first people I actually met with whenever I came on staff here with our partners, and I was just blown away with a lot of the structure behind Plant with Purpose. And so yeah, I'm super excited just to kind of dive into a little bit more of that today for me to understand a little bit more, but also to kind of share people at Chapelwood and other places what Plant with a Purpose does. So do you want to kind of give us an intro of Plant with Purpose and just kind of tell us from a general level what they're about?
Sure. Yeah, I'll give you the quick elevator speech of Plant with Purpose. So we are a Christian international development organization, and our mission is to reverse rural poverty and deforestation around the world. We actually got started in the early 80s. We're slightly older than I am. And we've scaled up over the years to now be in 8 countries, from Haiti to the Dominican Republic, southern Mexico, Thailand. We're also in East Africa, Tanzania, Burundi, Congo, and Ethiopia. Wow. And in all these countries, we're partnering specifically with rural farming families. Mm-hmm. So families who are relying on the land, what they can grow from it, to feed their families and hopefully have a bit left over to sell for income. But it's really some of the poorest people in the world that we're partnering with. And we help, through local staff in each of these countries, equip these families to experience environmental restoration, economic empowerment, and spiritual renewal. So those are kind of the 3 pillars we focus on. And through that program, our 200,000 partners around the world have experienced a 63% reduction in poverty on average, while finding a new purpose in their lives. So that's Plant with Purpose.
Yeah, that's really neat. I think it's cool to hear, the structure behind Plant with Purpose, that, going into these countries, y'all have a plan, and to hear the number behind, was it 63% of reduction in poverty in the places that y'all are working? That's got to be, that's really neat just to hear and to see that there is success behind what is happening.
Yeah, and we actually measure poverty multidimensionally because we feel that's the best way to see if we're making improvement in people's lives. Because when you're looking at the rural poor, a family might be making $5 a day. That actually would be a lot. But what if they're doing that and keeping all their kids home from school to work on the farm, right? So we actually look at the levels of girls in secondary school as one of our poverty measurements. Because when you're addressing the root cause of poverty for farming families, as we are, you get all these wonderful spillover effects for people's lives, like kids going to school, more nutritious diets, that type of thing.
Wow, that's neat. So when did Plant with a Purpose form?
So we officially formed in 1984. We were originally called Floresta. We changed our name to Plant with Purpose in 2010 because I think a lot of people thought Floresta was a type of toothpaste or something like that. So Plant with Purpose explains a little bit more what we do. Our founder was a guy from San Diego called Tom Woodard, and he was actually on a mission trip to Santo Domingo in Dominican Republic. And he was delivering food aid, basically, to families living in urban slums there. A hurricane had recently swept through. And he was surprised that a lot of the families he was talking to, they were actually farmers. So he couldn't understand, why would you give up your land in the countryside and swap that for this, urban slum? That can't be a better place to raise your kids. But they said, no, it was actually worse in the countryside. So Tom kind of followed that problem upstream and realized that these farmers, given their extreme poverty, they're trying to farm on degraded pieces of land. Like, don't picture a typical farm in the U.S., nice flat land, neat rows of crops. We're talking about rocky hillsides that you're trying to scrape out a living. And given their poverty and lack of resources, lack of access to financial services, when you fall in hard times, what do? And farmers would end up cutting down their trees. You know, it could be a fruit tree. They'd cut it down to make charcoal because they needed the cash that day to get through. They were forced to make bad choices for their land because of their poverty. So this is where deforestation and environmental degradation was just forming this vicious cycle with poverty. So farmers were trapped in that. Eventually the land just stops producing and they would move to the city. So it was really that nexus of deforestation and rural poverty that Tom discovered, and that's why he founded Plant with Purpose, was to address that.
Wow. That's cool. Yeah, that's neat to see. Those aren't things I would think about whenever you think about people moving from the countryside maybe to cities and stuff. You would think, I don't know, my thought goes that you would want to move because of better chances and stuff like that. But to hear it's more out of, they're almost being forced out just because of the living conditions and the farming conditions and everything like that. That's not something I would have ever guessed was happening.
You know, that's happening more and more around the world with climate change, extreme weather, when land isn't producing due to drought, due to changing rain patterns. It's a very common theme that families then leave the countryside, and you end up with cities like Port-au-Prince in Haiti that were originally designed just for a few 100,000 people, swelling to millions of people, and it's very terrible living conditions. But people don't have a choice. Yeah,
and just that point you hit on, that that problem extends to the city and the people living in the city because of whenever everyone flocks there, the infrastructure and everything isn't set up to sustain that level of people.
Exactly. So what we found in Haiti, for instance, because after the major earthquake in 2010, after any natural disaster, actually, a lot of people end up leaving the countryside, moving to Port-au-Prince, because Plant with Purpose works in very remote areas of Haiti. We're in 4 different regions. We have local staff on the ground there all the time. They're able to help work with families and communities to stay together and not have to break up out of that desperation and migrate. And the migration issue happens in other countries as well. Of course, in southern Mexico, we see a lot of migrants going through, and it's the same thing. When your land stops producing, you need a way to feed your kids, so you look for other opportunities. Plant with Purpose is helping families stay together by teaching and training these families and communities to restore their land, reverse deforestation, learn to take care of the watershed together, get access to savings and loan groups through pooling their own money together, building up the church to address needs in the community. So really helping to tackle the root cause of problems at a grassroots level in communities. And that can actually help families stay together and not need to migrate elsewhere for economic opportunity.
Yeah. Wow. A lot to digest there and a lot of information, but cool information. And so kind of on this podcast, we like to take it's called the golden circle approach, where we like to start with this question of why. I mean, the podcast is called Your Why, so we're kind of rooted in that question with a lot of things. So whenever we're talking about an organization like Plant with Purpose, what would you say is the why, the driving factor behind organization? I know we kind of talk about, obviously, farming techniques and all this, getting people out of poverty. But if you had to kind of narrow that down and come to like one statement, if so, of what is that why behind the organization, what would you kind of say that is for Plant with Purpose?
It's a great thought-provoking question. So I hope I can give a good response.
No, for sure.
I thought about it before, but now you said it has to be like one statement.
Well, I mean, I think the point there is not like we could list off all these things, but if we had to kind of narrow it down, it doesn't have to be like one sentence, but
Okay, you're giving me some leeway.
Giving you some room to move there, yeah.
So I think the why for Plant with Purpose is that, there are hundreds of thousands actually millions of these rural farming families who are suffering. They're living in extreme poverty and doing the best that they can do, but they're incredibly disempowered by their circumstances, right? They themselves are not poor, but they're dealing with the poor conditions of poor soil and lack of resources. And Plant with Purpose is able to help equip these families to realize their God-given potential and use their gifts and talents to help transform their land, find a new purpose in their lives, connect their faith to their vocation, and realize that they have a role in taking care of God's creation. There's a lot of dignity in that. And so these farmers who once were looked down upon in their societies, think of many parts of Africa, farming is seen as women's work. It's kind of looked upon in a degraded way. We're flipping that on its head. And these farmers who once were the main cause of deforestation globally are now championing taking care of God's creation and are an example to all of us of how to do that and help their communities thrive economically while finding this new purpose and dignity in their work. That's a long answer, but that's the why for Plant with Purpose.
No, that was a good answer. I like that. And I think whenever you can identify that passion, that driver. Oh, there's air conditioning. Fun. But whenever you can identify that kind of driving factor for yourself and for your organization, Ruby, that sounded good. I think that goes a long way, and just being able to wake up and say, okay, I know the reason why I'm doing this work. I'm not just going through the motion, but it gives you that extra edge to it, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So, kind of moving from that why into the how of the organization. How is that why kind of formed? How y'all are doing that? Like, how are you going out and you talk about you have this passion to see change in these people's lives that are living in extreme poverty, that are farmers, and you're trying to empower these women who have been kind of looked down upon for their position in the farming and all this stuff. What does that translate into the how?
It's really about the restoration of relationships, between each other, between ourselves and God, and between us and creation. So we've found that having local staff in each of the countries where we work, coming alongside these farming communities and building deep and meaningful relationships is the best way to approach it. So when I say local, I mean in Haiti, we have 50 staff. They're all Haitians from the regions, if not the actual communities where we're working. So our staff are composed of agricultural experts and pastors and people who facilitate the savings and loan groups. So they're building relationships in these communities and touching on all three of the pillars I mentioned before. So environmental restoration, economic empowerment, and spiritual renewal. And you kind of have to hit on all those three areas at the same time, right? So families and farmers are being equipped to adopt new agricultural techniques, so they're able to double their crop yields. At the same time, they're taking ownership with their community of the entire watershed and understanding, if we're cutting down trees up there, that's going to impact us down here, and we have a responsibility together to take care of this. But families living in extreme poverty can't just magically make these better choices for the land, right? So at the same time, we're equipping community members to come together into savings and loan groups. Again, we're talking about very rural, remote communities. There are no banks. Your best shot at taking a loan is from a loan shark, and you really don't want to go that route if you can avoid it. So we help equip community members to come together and save their own money, which maybe sounds ironic because we're talking about some of the poorest people in the world, but they've never had the opportunity to build a habit of saving because there's no safe place to save. But through these savings and loan groups, they can do that together, start saving maybe 10 cents a week. These groups are run by community members, they elect their own leaders, and through that pool of savings, farmers get to take loans from it and invest in their farms and their families. So it's working together, improving the land, improving the economic situation to make better decisions for their land and their families, starting small businesses, the community starts to thrive again, and importantly, working, with the church as well. Engaging local churches. We have about 700 local church partners around the world to look at the needs in their communities, but look at the resources they already have to meet those needs. So, for example, a group of pastors in one part of Haiti got together, did some workshops with Plant with Purpose, and realized that they could start to tackle homelessness in their communities.
Wow.
So they identified the most vulnerable family who didn't actually go to any of their churches, which I think is a neat part of the story. And together the community built them a new home. So getting the church involved, strengthening the church and communities, we want to lift up those churches, and also taking the step to connect a farmer's faith to their vocation of farming. They find this new dignity and purpose when they can think, I'm tending to God's creation, and this is an important role in God's kingdom. I have something to offer. That's a really important thing that we do as well. So that's the how of Plant with Purpose. It's really those 3 pillars, but it's all about local leadership and empowerment in the communities.
How do y'all identify communities or families or locations that you're wanting to target and to empower?
It's a great question. It's probably changed over the last 35 years. When we're looking at going into a new country, we actually have a needs index where we compile information about rural poverty, deforestation rates, soil quality, to get a sense of which countries would our programs really be able to make an impact in. So Democratic Republic of Congo is one of the newest places that we're working.
Wow,
and it really, given the extreme poverty there, the number of people engaged in subsistence farming, all of that, it makes sense for us to work there. And then within a country, we're really focused on targeting specific watersheds. So a watershed is basically an area where all the water drains out to the same place. So you really are connected environmentally. It does matter what somebody upstream is doing if you're living downstream. And a watershed can be huge. So we also divvy that up into sub-watersheds. But there are these environmental and other spillover effects when you're working just in one watershed. So that's what we're doing now, is ensuring we're focused on these strategic watersheds, trying to achieve saturation. So working with a certain number of communities or people. We don't have to work with everybody in a watershed. We just need to work with maybe a third, and there will be these positive spillover effects. Almost every farmer that we partner with reports sharing the knowledge they're learning from us with others. Once we set up a savings and loan group, groups are capable of splitting or replicating themselves. The whole idea is we're not going to be in a community for that long. The community will graduate from our program, and our local staff can then focus their efforts on another part of that watershed. But eventually the entire watershed will graduate from our programs when the poverty level is reduced and people are equipped to continue to grow out of poverty together.
That's great. I love that it's not dependent on y'all, right? Like coming in and saving and staying forever. But this idea of teaching skills and education so that they can continue on, right? And really
exactly. So we actually have, it's one of our values that we don't give handouts, because we're a long-term development organization. We're not a relief organization. We've trained, for example, about 1,500 of these savings and loan groups. And again, no handouts from Plant with Purpose, no cash given by us. These 1,500 groups have over $4 million in equity.
Wow, that's great.
All saved and grown, through their own
that's
efforts.
Amazing. Very cool.
That's really neat. And I think it's interesting hearing, because whenever you're talking about we don't need to work with everyone in the watershed, we need to only work with a third. Living Water International kind of does a similar method of whenever they go and build a well, they look for strategic areas to build that well. That's going to not only affect that community, but it's going to affect the communities around it as well, because that's the type of community they're in. So is that a similar thought process whenever you're looking, whenever you go to a watershed and you're looking, okay, what third are we going to work with? We're looking for the ones that we know are going to then go make an impact around them as well.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes through the local relationships that our staff have with people, meeting with different local churches, bringing them together. For instance, in the Kakumba watershed, the first watershed we started working in the Congo, due to ethnic conflict and different tribes that exist in the watershed, the churches, the pastors had never even met together before.
Wow.
So once we were able to help facilitate that, yes, there are all kinds of positive spillover effects. And now what we do too, because we're very big on measuring our impact and wanting to always do better and understand exactly, what our programs are doing and how we can tweak them and improve. The neighboring watershed to Kukumba, we already started to build relationships in years ago because we did a baseline assessment. So we were measuring poverty in Kukumba and the neighboring watershed at Kambukulu before we started to work in Kukumba. So then 2 years later, we were able to go back and see, okay, in Kukumba, the poverty level dropped by about 2/3 for everyone in the watershed, not just the people we're directly working with. Unfortunately, in the neighboring watershed at Kambukulu, poverty levels increased in the same amount of time. But we were already starting to build relationships there and lay the groundwork that now we've started to work in Kambukulu. And then people there can visit Kukumba, where we've already worked, and meet with some of the savings and loan groups and the churches and see firsthand the difference that's possible.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I think that question of how has also led into that question of what. Now we've talking about the actual physical acts that y'all are going out and doing, whether that's working with watersheds or your sustainable development groups. Is that what they're called?
Yes.
Okay. That's probably been, for me, the coolest thing to read and talk to y'all about and learn about, of just how you're teaching these villages good economic practices with their money, and how if we set aside a certain amount of money now for a certain amount of time, it grows. And I think, just hearing that, that's great for these countries, because, where else are they going to be learning that information? And so it's cool to see y'all partnering with them both on the physical side of actually going out and helping them with farming and all that, but then also kind of more on the mental money side of how do we handle our money that will be sustainable over time.
I've actually had the privilege of visiting a children and youth savings and loan group, which is part of the sustainable development group Evan just mentioned. This was in Oaxaca in southern Mexico. So it was really cool to see the president of this group, a 12-year-old young lady, stand up and start the meeting, and each of the kids had their own little booklet where it kept track of their savings. The youngest member of the group was 4 years old.
Oh, wow.
And just to see them learning that habit of saving, learning to trust each other, and build that sense of community between them, learning what they're doing with their bit of saving, how are they getting their savings. They were starting little small businesses. So really incredible skills at a young age that they'll carry with them their whole lives. And the president of the group, she actually got her mother involved in the adult group in the community. So she'd been involved first, which was amazing. And another key part of these savings and loan groups is members also donate a small amount at each meeting. They decide how much it is, but it's basically a way to tithe. And when somebody in the group falls upon hard times, say someone passes away and there's a funeral expense, or someone is in the hospital, instead of that member taking out a loan, they could go to the group and say, can you help me? And the group can vote and decide, yes, we've got this money set aside in what they call a social fund, and we're going to bless you with this gift. It's not a loan. You don't have to repay us back.
That's amazing, that generosity, right, that comes from other people that have come alongside you in the past, and the way that that's developing that community, those relationships, right? I feel like money is already this personal thing, at least here in America. So to be that vulnerable with other people of, hey, this is what I'm struggling with right now, and I could really use help, and to have others come alongside is powerful. And so that's really cool.
It is. And I think we have a lot to learn from that too. Every time I visit one of these savings and loan groups, I'm struck by that, the trust they have with each other, the accountability. And I think that we could learn from that.
Yeah. No, I agree. Okay, last question for this section that we're going to kind of talk about is, after kind of hearing, obviously, I think we could sit here and talk about Plant with Purpose and everything they do for hours, but kind of hearing the snapshot of what all that y'all do, what are ways that maybe people can get involved or kind of start working with y'all, or what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is to continue to learn about this connection between rural poverty in particular and environmental degradation and deforestation. That was something new for me when I started at Plant with Purpose, to really understand that connection. So one way to learn about that, go on our website, plantwithpurpose.org, sign up for our newsletter. We actually released a podcast recently too called Grassroots, so that could be a good place to dive in and learn more. We have a really good Instagram account, always sharing stories from the field. So that would be a good way to get some more insights. That's Plant W Purpose. On that note, for each new follower we get, a tree is planted. So if you're a fan of more trees in the world, head on over to Instagram, or actually on our website, we have a new thing where you can plant trees or forests even in honor of somebody. So that's kind of a tangible way to get involved. But I'd also just encourage people to think about their role in taking care of God's creation, and how can you do that locally too. I don't think we need to have a big divide between global and local missions. So be inspired by our partnering farmers who are planting, hundreds of trees each year, and maybe go volunteer at a local garden or do something like that. Some of our supporters actually get together at Main Street Ministries. That's a local nonprofit here in Houston, and they have a garden. So the first Saturday of each month in the morning, we get together to tend God's creation and also learn about how Main Street Ministries is empowering people here in Houston. So those are some ideas. I know we might have some young adults listening too. Plant with Purpose does have summer interns, headquartered in San Diego, so a bit of a trip, but something to keep in mind. And we also have a young advisory board, which you could probably join remotely. So that would be a great way to get involved as well.
Yeah, that's great, and we'll be linking that on social media and our videos and stuff about how to follow you on social media and your website and everything like that. So
is this when we say click the link below?
Yeah, click
point. Yeah,
point anywhere. We'll do. Something will happen. But yeah, so don't worry about having to memorize that website or that account. We will add links for you, the listener, to go click on. All right, well, I thought this was a great little conversation to have about Playing with a Purpose. We are going to now jump into the next section, and we're going to take a little bit of a break. We're going to turn on all notifications so that we don't... Howdy, and thanks for watching. Please leave a like and comment on this video. And if you aren't subscribed already to the Your Why channel, go ahead and subscribe. Also, don't forget to turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our videos. If anything during the video piques your interest, go ahead and check out the descriptions in the link below. Go and find your why, people.